Right. Hello, everyone. This is the collab review session for the Insure Shares feature or Insure Shares APIs. So, yeah, a couple of changes being proposed for this. So they're both, I kept them both work in progress on Garrett, but it's mostly because I didn't finish testing them as I would like to have yet. So I'm still doing the testing phase and figuring out a couple of details. But yeah, let's take a look. I think this is going to be quick. That's not that big of a change, and it follows the same structure as we know, like for new APIs and getting requests going through the share scheduler manager and stuff like that. So it doesn't go through the scheduler because we already know what is going to be the host that we are targeting these requests to. But yeah, so starting with the version bump, I think we'll need to coordinate this for this cycle because there are a couple of changes that will do the API version bump. I think this cycle, if we manage to merge all of the features, we'll get up to API version 2.89, but we can coordinate that, of course. Yeah, so API version bump. Um, Also, the changes for routing, so that like the request can go through the can get to the new API that we are introducing for Ensure Shares. Yeah, and the changes to the services API, which is pretty much implementing the new endpoint so that we can get the request, do a couple of validations, and then forward the request to the specific share manager. Yeah, that's pretty much what it is doing. We check if the host is none. If the host wasn't provided, that's the only thing that we would require for this. So, and we also try to get the service. It's got to be Manila Share service. You can't run the Share Shares API for a service that is not binary Manila Share binary. So if it's not found, then we just don't go ahead. Otherwise, we go to the service API, which is kind of a new file. Let's go through that because it should be at the end, I think. Um, Services API. Yeah, so not a lot of new things here as well. Not something very different. Only like the same structure that as we follow, like defining a services API and then doing one extra validation if the service is disabled or and the state of the service is up. Otherwise, we won't be able to run this API for the specific service. And also trying to make use of the configuration option that we discussed over the spec, which is um, there is the scenario where we talked about where we shouldn't allow or we shouldn't pretty much force the status update when you are running Ensure Shares. So I've added a configuration option. I kept this global because I think if you need to declare this for each backend, it could, you know, not be a very good thing in terms of usability. We can also change that, of course, if you have any feedback around that. But I kept it kind of like as a global Manila option, and then we can define if the status of the shares should be updated during the Ensure Shares or not. So the next thing, so this will pretty much redirect us to the scheduler or to the other manager. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, the Share PC API. And the Share PC API will pretty much go ahead and target the request or invoke the share manager and start the Ensure Shares procedure. Yeah, a couple of the corresponding version bumps for this. Also, now adding a new check or a new variable only for the ensure driver resources method. Um, two new actually. So first one of them is the update is instances status, and the second one would be only to skip the backend info check. skipping the backend info check would be true only when we are issuing this through the API, because otherwise, I think a couple of releases ago, or even before, the ensure shares would only run when there were uh, differences between the new uh, backend info hash and the previous one. So if we are running through the API and we would like to force the ensure shares to be run all the time that we issue it, then we should skip. I think we should skip the backend info hash check. So whenever it's from the API, skip backend info check is going to be true, and update instances status true the following the default for the new configuration option I've added. But I mean, if it's false, then it's going to end up being false, and you just need to configure the default for that. Um, yeah, I didn't say this before, but I've added a new field to the services. So there's a new database migration. So the services column will have the ensuring field, which is a boolean. So if it's ensure share is running, then ensuring should be true. If it's false, it should be false. At the beginning of the procedure, I will change the status of the service to ensuring, but also change the status of the share instances in case they are in case we should update the status of them and the config option is set to true. Yeah, not a lot of things have changed. Honestly, it's pretty much trying to get the request from the API to get to this point. And yeah, trying to up doing handling the status updates and so on. And at the end, uh, updating the status of the share instances and also the status of or the ensuring state of the share. Um, yeah, a couple of unit tests, and I think the client change is already up as well. I've tested the client change last week. It was looking good. I think I've managed to submit the code to get the most recent version. I think there are a couple of issues with testing that we've identified, and it can be really tricky. Testing on with Zoo or Manila Tempest plugin, it's going to be tricky because we can't just go ahead and uh, run ensure shares with and change the status of the resources and so on. We can use our option set to of updating the status of updating the status of the share instances set to false. That would be one way for testing it. But I mean, it would only validate that, like the API works and the request went through. Yeah, we can also double check if the status of the service is set to ensuring. But yeah, it would be more simple than, we doing configuration changes and stuff like that. Yeah, so I think that's one of the concerns for testing. I don't have a Tempest change for that yet because I was thinking about that. But yeah, if we are considering not changing the status of the share instances, then we can just go ahead and I can just go ahead and do not use the status change config option set to true, and I can disable that. And I think testing should be easier for us. Um, and yeah, I think that's and there is one thing as well, like the backend info hash is something that was a bit complicated during testing, and I couldn't make it get reloaded. So because I think there are a couple of parts of reloading configs that we do only on the service restart and getting the fresh config from the config file. So that was the tricky part and the part that I'm still yet to work on. And the other scenarios where I don't change that backend info hash and just try to modify other configuration options, I didn't test enough. So that's the parts that I'm yet to test. Yeah, but I got stuck for a moment while trying to figure out what to do with the backend info hash stuff and trying to modify the in some cases the version. Initially I was testing with this FFS driver, and there we have the option of specifying the string conversion for the value for the driver, and then we can just update it, and it would be picked up next time we run insure shares, and it would be understood as a change as well. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Um, there are a couple of things to do, especially testing yet. But I think the first thing I would like to ask here is, I think Maurice mentioned that you guys have been doing some sort of periodic uh, ensure shares runs in your deployment. So how did you guys handle, like, getting the updates, or is there something that you needed to do with regards to live reloading configs or something like that, or just like running sure shares all the way pretty much works for you?
Yeah, what? Well, we don't. I think we don't compare this. We don't use this comparing the backend info hash. So we are doing the same, basically like skipping this, just ignoring this check. I think, but that's why this is not a problem. We are mimicking a service restart with reloading everything. I think.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks. Right. So, do you guys have any questions, suggestions, or concerns with the implementation and the things that are in this change so far? A couple of unit tests failed. They passed locally, but I didn't push the changes to fix this yet. So sorry about that. But in essence, that's pretty much, like how the change would look like initially, and I would like to get some feedback on this.
I've seen that you're not allowing to call this if the service is disabled. What are your thoughts behind that? So because I could imagine a workflow like doing a maintenance on the backend where I intentionally disable my service, and at the end of the maintenance, before I make it available again for the general public, I would like to run the ensure as an admin.
Okay, yeah, I didn't think of that scenario. So I think I was trying to prevent only running, like when it was disabled, but I didn't think of the scenario of like keeping it disabled only for a maintenance, which is a common use case. So yeah, I think I can update that check and allow it to be done only when it's down. I think that would be more suitable for the scenario. But yeah, nothing specific, like not a specific issue of making me, do the um, avoiding the disabled was
Mm.
like extra precaution, I think, which is I didn't think of this scenario.
I think it's the same persona that would do the disablement and that would run this ensure shares anyhow. So it's a cloud admin, someone that would be allowed to call this. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I'll update with that.
So, if I understood that question correctly, you're basically saying if we wanted to do ensure shares properly, we would enforce a workflow where you would set the service status to disabled. It's still available to make these sort of administrative changes, and then we would run the ensure shares routine, basically call the API, and then re-enable it. Right? That would ideally be safe in especially clouds like yours where you are going to turn off the option to change the share status.
Yeah, but I would maybe recommend this in the documentation, but not enforce this. So I would keep this up
Mm.
to the
Okay.
operators to decide. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see a downside either way, because the point of changing the share status is similar, except the hope is that you've done something on the back end, and if you were to get new provisioning requests, you're okay. You can take that new provisioning request, and we are only going to worry about ensuring all the available existing shares. Um, and so you can continue working as usual, except you can't make any modifications to these existing shares while we are making sure that they're still around and we have captured their export paths and all of that stuff. But if that is not a use case to the cloud, we can do what you were suggesting, which is, I mean, as an administrator, you would disable the thing and then do the ensure shares. Once Carlos removes that check, that's going to be safer for you to do, the way you don't allow any new provisioning as well. Does that make sense, Carlos?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Certainly something we can document.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, that's good.
This looks good. I think the only concern I had was, if folks would want that, status ensuring behavior to apply at the backend level, but I really don't. I don't want to anticipate it. Um, you may not need it. You ain't gonna need it. So there's no point for us to invent it.
Yep.
At least we're going into this place where, with Red Hat OpenStack, one pattern that I was seeing, or rather, was deliberately doing, was trying to not use multi backend, and it kind of made things easier for us to do service health checks and so on, and maintenance and things like that. Um, so multi backend made sense where we were running, this as a monolith in like on a bare metal server. But the more we see these patterns where we're running this as containers, or microservices as they're meant to be, and you can have many number of those. We tend to try to discourage the multi backend use case. So for me personally, it doesn't make a difference if we were to change that config option to be in the backend level versus default section sort of a thing. But I'm not sure if there are operators out there tied to the multi backend approach still.
Yep.
And honestly, it may not be that big a decision. You know, Seems like a small inconvenience.
Yes. Yeah, I was. I don't know. It's the kind of concern that sometimes I have, and it may not be like that big of a deal. But I was trying to think about how painful it would be to maintain the deployment later, because I mean every single time you edit or updated the backend, or I think you won't be adding backends so often. You might, but I was only thinking of a scenario where you need to keep updating or adding backends, and then you need to define this config option for every single one of them. So yeah. Right, any other questions or suggestions? Okay, taking the silence as no. Yeah, thanks for the feedback and for your thoughts. Yeah, let's wrap this up. I'll stop the screen share. Then, sorry, end the recording.